that there are a number of these public intellectuals who are admitting that the Christianity, the Bible, is the force that has created the modern world. And the only way to revive the West is to return to the Bible.
Welcome to Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance, a show where we examine how our mission as Christians is to not only spread the gospel around the world to all the nations, but to also transform the nations to increasingly reflect the truth, goodness, and beauty of God's kingdom. Tragically, the church has largely neglected this second part of her mission, and today, Christians have little influence on their surrounding cultures. Join us on this podcast as we rediscover what it means for each of us to disciple the nations and to create Christ-honoring cultures that reflect the character of the living God.
Well, welcome again, everybody, to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences. This is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. My name is Scott Allen. I'm the president of the DNA, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Luke Allen and Dwight Vogt. And our special guest today is our old friend, longtime friend, Vishal Mangalwadi. It's so nice to have you back on Ideas Have Consequences, Vishal. Great to see you.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for what you're doing around the world.
Oh, it's a joy to have you back with us. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Vishal, if you've missed our earlier podcasts, just a brief introduction. Vishal is born and raised in India. He's a Bible scholar, philosopher, and just brilliant thinker when it comes to the subject of the impact that the Bible has made on shaping culture around the world. I really don't think there's anyone that is, understands that topic as clearly and deeply as Vishal does. He's the author of many books, probably most famously a book by the title of The Book That Made Your World, How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization, an outstanding book that I highly recommend everyone get a hold of and read. We had the privilege of working with Vishal on a couple of other books, Truth and Transformation, another outstanding book that I would recommend that you look at. And then, of course, he's got a number of new books that kind of continue in these same themes. But anyways, there's so much more I could say, Vishal. I just encourage you to learn more about him and his writing, his teaching. Anyways, great to have you back with us again, Vishal.
Well, thank you again. Yes, I've enjoyed the support and publicity that DNA has given me.
Well, we feel like we're team members. Even though we're not in the same organization, we very much are working, in the same ministry, the same mission, and you play such a vital role in it. Hey, I thought we'd get our conversation started today with something that Luke just brought to my attention before you came on. I thought this was really fascinating. A little exchange that happened on X, formerly Twitter. Luke, do you want to explain what you were seeing there?
Sure, yeah. I thought this was really interesting. I think this happened over Christmas on Twitter, on X. And this was a tweet that I know, Vishal, you saw. I actually, on your Instagram is where I saw it because of the screenshot. But Zuby, who's a Christian rapper, he sent out a brief tweet, it sounds like just a thought of his, and it says, quote, "I don't think I've ever said this publicly and directly, but I think the West is absolutely screwed if we lose Christianity. Explaining this in full would require an entire book, but I've thought about it a lot over the years, and I've reached this conclusion." So he sends out that tweet, and then right there, Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, just decides to comment, and he says, "I think you are probably right, that we're absolutely screwed if the West loses Christianity." And then I love this because you screenshotted this, Vishal, and you said, this is the book you're looking for, and you pointed to the book that changes everything, which I would agree with. I think that book does an excellent job explaining why the West and the world at large needs Christianity. Yeah, so I heard that you sent Elon Musk the book, and I hope he reads it, because this tweet just, it seems like a reoccurring event that we're seeing right now amongst a lot of critical thinking people in the West, all over the world, but people that are recognizing the importance that the Bible has played in shaping the culture and the world that we live in, the importance that the Bible has played in defining right and wrong and morality and things that we all agree are good and we want to see continue in the world. But more and more people that aren't Christians are drawing the line back to the Bible, which I think is really encouraging. Is that something that you've noticed?
Yes. This is something which is amazing, because what Elon Musk is saying is exactly what the place where Tom Holland, an atheist historian, science fiction writer in Britain, he had come to the same conclusion, which he outlines in his book, The Dominion. And Jordan Peterson is perhaps the most famous public intellectual around the world who has come to the same conclusion. 2 years ago, I gave him the copies of The Book That Made Your World and This Book Changed Everything, the two books in which I developed the thesis. I have 4 or 5 books about India, how the Bible created modern India. But these are books about the Western civilization. And when I gave it to him, he looked at The Book That Made Your World, the book that you mentioned. And he asked me, did you write this before? Did you write this as an Indian? So I said, yes, I wrote these books before coming to the USA, that particular book. So he said, I'm looking for a book on this topic. So 2-3 days later, my friends, I had deliberately not signed the book or put my contact information because I wanted him to engage with the thesis rather than with me. So 3 days later, people began calling me from Africa, from Germany, India, that Jordan Peterson is looking for your contact information. So then he told me that he's read the book. He's now reading the second book. This book changed everything. And he would like to interview me. Then he did that 1 hour, 47-minute interview, which has had almost 300,000 views. But David Gress, I'm looking forward to a public dialogue with him in Scandinavia in April. He was one of the first in his book From Plato to NATO. He's a proper professional historian. His book most famous book is called From Plato to NATO, where he was the first to expose the modernist myth that the Enlightenment, rationalism created the modern world. So he has also moved very close to the position which Elon Musk is expressing, that it is Christianity which has created the modern world. And if the West loses Christianity, it will be devastated. You have Niall Ferguson, another public intellectual. It's very interesting that Niall's wife, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she is a Somali refugee who became a member of parliament in Holland, opposed Islam after 9/11. One of her intellectual partner, so political partner, he was stabbed to death by Muslim terrorists, and on the knife which they left on her body was a note that she will be next. So she had to flee Holland and come to North America. She became a public atheist, a very close friend with Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and the other atheists. But in London during ARC, I gave her a copy of The Book That Made Your World. She asked me to sign it, which I did. And then 4 days later, she made a public statement that she is now a Christian. So, from a Muslim to an atheist, and having become a Christian was very interesting. So, you're right that there are a number of these public intellectuals who are admitting now. Most of them have not yet declared themselves to be Christian, but they are declaring publicly that the Christianity, the Bible, is the force that has created the modern world, and the only way to revive the West is to return to the Bible. So you're right, and I'm grateful that the Lord is using these books.
Vishal, I want to talk more about this. I find this one of the most fascinating things that's happening in the world right now. This movement that you're speaking of. You mentioned many names. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Tom Holland. And now I didn't know this until this morning. Apparently Elon Musk, right, is saying I think you're right. We would be screwed without the Bible.
Yes.
I just find this fascinating, and I think I really was looking forward to having you on to get your perspective on this. I call it, maybe it's a movement. I'm not quite sure what you would call it. It's a movement that, the way I look at it, it's a returning and a valuing again of the role that the Bible and Christianity has played in building the West, and particularly, the parts of the West that these public intellectuals really treasure. These things like free speech, freedom of religion, a lot of these kind of traditional liberal values that they apparently are seeing, as under threat right now. You're right. In my lifetime, you called it the modernist myth or the modernist narrative, that has held sway, in the West in my lifetime. So you would expect people like these folks to basically reinforce that narrative that, the West was, a messed up, dark ages type of place, with all sorts of, religious wars, and it wasn't until the Enlightenment and kind of the Age of Reason, when we got rid of the Bible and God, that things started kind of moving in a positive direction. I mean, you would do a much better job, Vishal, of kind of describing the modernist narrative than I would, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, that's all I've heard, from people in kind of leading intellectual circles in my lifetime, and all of a sudden here comes this group, almost out of nowhere, that are kind of rejecting that and saying, no, it turns out that the Bible really is something that's essential. I would love to hear your take on why. Why is this happening now?
Well, there are many factors. One is the countercultural movement of the 1960s, when the students in Berkeley University and other places shouted slogans, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ got to go. The Western Civ that they were talking about was, in fact, that modernist myth that had been invented in the first decade of the 20th century in New York, and promoted by people like Will Durant. Will Durant was a lapsed Roman Catholic. Every Monday evening he gave a lecture in a Presbyterian church across the main entrance to the New York University, and his lectures were published as Story of Civilization, Story of Philosophy, etc. So in those lectures, he had promoted this myth. And the sad thing was that because the Christians in North America and Europe had abandoned universities and moved into Bible seminaries, the best Christian minds were training seminary students. They were not training historians and sociologists and philosophers, thinkers. So the Christian interpretation of Western history was became unknown. Average pastor didn't know. Average theologian who had studied in seminary could be very intelligent, could know Greek and Hebrew, but he didn't know how the modern world was created. So the only voice that was heard, there were a few exceptions, such as Francis Schaeffer's "How Should We Then Live?" That was one of the series that helped many of us, but that it was not a serious academic work. But
if I could just interrupt really quick, Vishal, on that, I have just my own personal story just relates to this, because I grew up here in the state of Oregon, went to a very liberal arts university and studied history. And I was a young Christian at that time, but the portrayal of history that I was taught in my undergraduate years was uniformly shaped by the modernist myth. And so, for example, especially in early American history, when you study the Puritans and the Pilgrims that settled here, I mean, they were these backwards people, and they were, killing Native Americans and violent, and they enslaved people and this and that. It was all uniformly negative, and I kind of absorbed that, right? And so even as a young Christian, I'm kind of ashamed, right, to be a Christian because of so much negative things that have happened in the past in the name of Jesus. And it wasn't until I got out of college, I read a couple of books that, by the way, I never was introduced to in college. One of those books was William Bradford's book. He was the governor of the Plymouth Plantation, very famous, biography. And I was stunned by, just the depth of his thinking, biblical thinking, his compassion. It wasn't at all like this portrayal, the stereotype that I had learned. And then I met you, Vishal, and you introduced me to the work of John Wesley and all that had happened in England during the Wesleyan revivals. And I thought, I never studied this. Like, it was completely wiped out, and it wasn't until after I got out of college that I was first exposed to some of these ideas. But my own personal story intersects with this so much. And I remember just being, I felt like I was ripped off, I spent a lot of money and I was just had, by my education.
Hi, friends. If you'd like to learn more about how you can disciple your family, your workplace, your school, your society, or even your nation, make sure to check out our flagship online training course here at the Disciple Nations Alliance, which is called the Kingdomizer Training Program. We live in a world of poverty, corruption, and injustice. We all know this isn't the way it should be, and help needs to come from somewhere. But who is responsible to fight poverty and bring healing to our broken communities? The government or the church? The answer is the church, but unfortunately, we have largely neglected this responsibility. Here at the Disciple Nations Alliance, for the last 25 years, we have worked around the world helping Christians understand that our mission is more than saving souls for heaven. Our mission also includes being the hands and feet of God to transform the nations and bring healing and transformation to our broken communities. If you'd like to learn more about how you can play a part in God's plan for the nations, check out the Kingdomizer Training Program, and that is available at corumdeo.com. Join over 1 million others who have learned how to bring biblical transformation into every corner of society by signing up today at corumdeo.com. Again, that is corumdeo.com, or you can always find the link in the episode page.
Yes. Well, you're absolutely right. And Tom Holland, for example, who has written now extensively that the Bible, Christianity created the modern world. All the best things in England, Europe come from Christianity. He made a statement in one of his Zoom events that freedom and democracy came from Greece. Mm-hmm. And I wrote in the chat that no, they didn't. They came from the Bible. Mm-hmm. So the organizer, Jeff Fountain, of his Zoom, he asked if I would be willing to discuss this with Tom Holland. I said, sure. So Tom Holland and I had a Zoom dialogue in which it is on YouTube. 3 times in that 1 hour, Tom Holland acknowledges that he had never studied the history of freedom and democracy. And I gave him all the reasons why modern freedom and democracy came from the Bible, not from Greece. The only political system Greece ever exported was totalitarian imperialism through Alexander the Great. It began the empire in India.
Yeah.
Greece never taught freedom and democracy because the
As an
greatest of
Indian,
Greek
you have a particular perspective on this here as well. That's right.
yes, the greatest of Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, they both condemned democracy as the worst of all political systems. So that was very interesting that here is a professional historian who has already written books saying that the best features of the West came from Christianity, but he has no idea that freedom and democracy came from Christianity. So that video is online. But that your question is, why is this movement now happening globally? That public intellectuals are saying that Christianity is the reason for the whole progress of the last 500 years of the West coming out of the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and then blessing and transforming the world like DNA is trying to do in Africa, in Asia, in South America, making an impact to change the destiny of the nations. And so
Vishal, I have a theory. I'd like to run it by you because as to why this new movement is bursting onto the scene right now. I read a book. I'm sure you probably read it as well. The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray. He's an Oxford professor, non-Christian guy. He wrote this in response to. I read this when I was researching my book on cultural Marxism and social justice. My most recent book.
Mhm.
And he was writing on the same thing. He was saying, wow, we're seeing this really radical move now back to a kind of a cultural Marxism, that it's not new, right? It came out of the Frankfurt School, after World War II. It led to the Marxist movement in the United States during the 1960s. But then it was kind of squashed. And now it's kind of been reborn, and it's not only been reborn, it's been moving from strength to strength to the point that it's captured our institutions. And I think that so that now when you look at, any of these major institutions of the West, government, business, education, they are all kind of captured by this radical ideology. And Douglas Murray's writing about that, and he's observing one facet of it. And I thought this was so fascinating. He said, this ideology is based on grievance, right? That the problems in the world are because of a particular group, right? In the new iteration, they're white Christian men or whatever it is, whiteness, white supremacy, you name it, it's the problems in the world are because of a particular group. We have to, the response to that is we have to, tear that group down. It's retributive. It's grievance oriented. It's about taking back. And he was looking at that, and he was observing that he got onto the topic of forgiveness. He said, there's no forgiveness in this ideology. Like there's no sense of, there's no reconciliation, no forgiveness. And then he was just reflecting on that. What would that mean in a culture if you eliminated forgiveness, reconciliation? What would it mean in a family? What would it mean in an entire civilization? And he was alarmed, like, oh my gosh, that, everything would fall apart. And and then you saw him go, oh, he turned from that to, that comes from the Bible, right? That idea of, forgiveness and loving our neighbor and, loving our enemies. And he goes, that just doesn't spring from anywhere. That doesn't come from the modernist myth. That comes from the Bible. And here's this non-Christian guy, homosexual guy who starts talking very positively about the Bible. But what it did for me, Vishal, was it made me think part of the reason, as you said, I'm sure there's many reasons for it, but part of the reason that this movement is coming onto the scene now is because things have gotten to the point in the West where you can't take all these good things that have come out of the Bible and Christianity cannot be taken for granted anymore. It looks like they literally could go away. And the threat, of this new ideology coming on the scene is so serious. And I think before, there wasn't all of these good things. Forgiveness is just one example. It could just be taken for granted, but they can't be anymore. Like we could lose these things. And it's causing great alarm amongst these folks. Anyways,
Yes.
What are your thoughts about my theory there of what's kind of causing this right now?
Yes, we should talk about the movement and how to respond to it. But
Yeah.
if I may add to what you have just said, with two more illustrations and the academic work, that DNA, particularly Darrow Miller's books on family
Yes.
and marriage, wives, women, has been very important. And when Freud, in early 20th century, Sigmund Freud, father of psychoanalysis, proposed that he was an atheist, so love was not a spiritual thing, love was a physical instinct. Sex was a physical, chemical instinct for him. Repression of sexual urges, he said, causes all the mental problems,
Right,
schizophrenia, insanity, what is called demon possession. Everything is a result of sexual repression. The sex
Everything
should
that's
not
wrong
be
with the world basically
Yeah.
is sexual repression.
sexual
right?
repression. So the sexual fantasies should not be repressed. They should be expressed, which is at the base of the modern pornography. That if father and daughter have affection for each other, that should not be repressed, but expressed. And practice your fantasies, implement them. Now, if this is true, if Freud's overall thesis is true, then societies that had loose sexual ethics should be better and healthier. So there was an Oxford, a professor, he was teaching both in Oxford and Cambridge, Joseph Unwin. He did a massive sociological study of, are those societies that have freedom for premarital sex or extramarital sex, are they better, stronger, healthier than Puritan societies, societies based on Puritan ethics, that even if you are personally not a Puritan, you may be a president of America who is having affairs with other women other than your wife. And American culture would still impeach a president who lies about his private sex life. So the American culture is still Puritan, even if individuals don't believe that.
Right.
So he looked at it. This was a massive study, something over 100 society for which anthropological data was available of what exactly are their sexual norms and how is their health as a society. And Joseph Unwin concluded in his massive book on sex and civilization that, in fact, these societies which are called patriarchal, Christian, puritanical, they have produced the healthiest men, women, children, families, nations. Now, the academic world, so this was a proper academic anthropological research, but for 100 years, the university world has suppressed this study, and kept on promoting the atheist philosophical outlook that the spirit should not rule over the flesh. Flesh should rule, which is pornography, which is permissiveness, and which has proven disastrous that the Caucasian population in Europe and also in North America is declining. The women do not want to get married. And if they get married, they do abort their babies. They do not want to have children. Self-interest is above the interest of sacrificing yourself for your children, building up the next generation. So here is one area with Joseph, which for 100 years we have had scientific evidence that Christian sexual ethics actually creates the strongest men and women and children and families and economy and politics. I can give more illustrations, but if the people are turning back to explore Christianity, the real question is, what do we do? How should we, as the Christian community, as the church, respond to this growing phenomenon? If I may articulate what exactly the movement is.
Yeah, please.
At the end of October, 30th, 31st, November 1st, Jordan Peterson and others initiated a conference in London called ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
And this really, right, I'm familiar with this, Vishal, and I know you were a part of that.
Yes.
This was really the kind of the first gathering of this movement in a sense, right? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So yes, the second one is planned for 2025. One of the key figures behind it is John Anderson, of the former Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, Philippa Stroud, who is coming to the USA. She's a baroness, a lady, a member of House of Lords in Britain. She was the chair, so she was really leading that. The overall thesis, Os Guinness was one of the important speakers from the first day.
Just on that, there wasn't a lot of, again, these folks, as you said, many of them are not Christians, or they haven't come out yet and said, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, or had some kind of confession. Many of them are, I think, right on the cusp of doing that. Some of them have, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. But even in her testimony, which I read, I thought it was fascinating. It was such a fascinating testimony because it didn't talk about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It talked about the fact that I've come to recognize that without the Bible, we can't have all of these things that I so treasure and cherish in the West.
Yes.
And so now I'm a Christian. It was very much a civilizational kind of testimony, which
Yes.
I thought was very fascinating. Yeah.
Yes.
So
you're right. So
Yeah.
there was for devotions there was poetry in the morning, no prayer.
Okay.
Very good poet, Christian, very good poetries every day.
But not like you would have if you get a bunch of evangelicals together at like a Lausanne conference or something like that,
yes.
right? Yeah.
It was not a Christian conference. In fact, the very big difference between Lausanne and ARC, and many people are seeing Jordan Peterson as contemporary Billy Graham, that he can fill the stadiums and he can fill mega halls wherever he goes, and people would pay hundreds of dollars to come and hear him. So he is becoming a phenomenon, but he wouldn't call himself a Christian, though he's come very close. And his wife and his daughter are believers. The wife is a Roman Catholic, and she told me that she gets up 4 o'clock every morning to pray, find her rosary and pray.
Wow.
But
4 o'clock. Wow.
and she does organize special mass services for him. So for Christmas, New Year, Easter, etc., he would go to some of these mass. But he has very good friends, both amongst Roman Catholics, Orthodox, and Protestant evangelicals. So, which is interesting.
But yeah, I remember what I was going to say, because you, Vishal, I think you were kind of honored, and so was Osgenis. There wasn't a lot, but they kind of reached out to you out of the kind of the, let's say our side, the kind of the evangelical group, and brought you in, which I thought that's quite an honor, to be a part of that.
It was actually, there were many Christians, many believing Christians in the conference
that were a part of that,
prominent roles. Paul Marshall was an important figure behind Philippa Stroud. So amongst the organizers, there were more British evangelicals with whom I did not have personal relationship, who were really organizing and running the thing.
Got it.
But both Peterson and John Anderson personally wrote inviting me, and I've just received their request for input in planning the next session. But the important point is that overall thesis of ARC, which emerged through Christian and non-Christian speakers. So these are public intellectuals, poets, politicians who are speaking. And they, as well as economists, businessmen, they agreed with the overall thesis that Western civilization is a beautiful bouquet of flowers. And these flowers have been cut from their roots. Therefore, the flowers are fading. So the Western civilization is fading, withering, because it is cut from their roots. And to reconnect the West to its roots is the big challenge. And they acknowledge that the roots is the Bible. Even the non-Christians who would call themselves atheists. Now, this was a thesis that Pope, who before he became the Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, who became Pope Benedict XVI.
Not the current Pope, but the previous one, right?
Not the current Pope, previous one. And with an American Roman Catholic intellectual, Marcelo Pera, they wrote this book, Without Roots, The West, Relativism, Christianity, and Islam. That's the subtitle, The West, Relativism, Christianity, and Islam. The book is called Without Roots. So this was their thesis, but Os Guinness has used this thesis. Os Guinness, for those who do not know, is a Christian public intellectual, sociologist, who has written many books. So he articulated this Joseph Ratzinger's thesis in ARC, which received general consensus. Nobody challenged it. That yes, Western civilization is a beautiful bouquet of flowers. These flowers are withering. Family is withering. Economy is in debt, etc., etc. Business is no longer trustworthy because the flowers have been cut off from their roots. So the one important weakness of ARC was not acknowledging that the flowers flowers and fruits don't come directly out of the root. They come out of stem. So they're connected. Flowers are connected to the roots through the stem, through the branches, which is what Jesus says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. You bear fruit and leaves for the healing of the nations. And this has been a very important point that Bob Moffat, the co-founder of DNA, has been making consistently, that it is not just the worldview, the roots, which produce flowers, but the church, which is the stem out of which has come. So the impact that the Bible has had is because of the church, which preserves, translated, publishes, distributes, teaches the Bible, and established all the colleges, universities, schools, etc. So this is a missing piece in the ARC movement
Yes.
that
Yes.
Davidson Hunter, he makes that point in Changing the World, that it's not just ideas. Ideas have consequences, but ideas need institutions, groups, networks of groups, which has been a very strong point that Bob Moffett has kept emphasizing. And that was missing in ARC.
Yes.
And if ARC is not able to really mobilize the church, then it will be a movement that goes nowhere, because this is really the key, that you have great ideas, you have the truth, but actually truth was downplayed. Very few of the speakers could utter the word truth. Their emphasis was story.
Yeah.
They use the word story, particularly Jordan Peterson himself and Philippa Strout. They called Christianity a better story. And by the word story, they meant worldview. So what you and I would have called 20 years ago a worldview, they're calling it the story. That the story is the lens. Your worldview is the lens with which you even read the Bible. So instead of the Bible shaping your worldview, you impose your unconscious worldview derived from your own sociology, whether that's your Hindu culture or Muslim culture or Western secular culture. You impose that upon the Bible. So that would be another important thing to discuss, unless you have something else.
No, I would, any of these threads. I'm just so fascinated in this movement, Vishal, and I've heard Jordan Peterson speak on story in a very moving way. I think he's exactly right. He says that people as individuals and whole civilizations, they can't live apart from a story. We all live out of stories. And he's speaking, I think, as a psychologist there, the importance of these stories with storylines and heroes and villains and things like that, and that the story, so you can't take story for granted. Everyone's living out of some story, whether it's Karl Marx's story or it's in the Bible. I mean, Darrow's book is called The Transforming. His famous talk is called The Transforming Story. The Bible is a story. Now, you're right, though, that it's not just any story. It's not just a better story. It's the true story. It's it's the story that aligns with reality. So that's a problem if we can't come around and saying, hey, go ahead.
Yeah,
Luke,
if you can't use the word, if you don't want to use the word truth, then that's where the importance of the word truth comes in, because there is a true story,
right?
So,
well,
not just better stories, but
the
true
capital T
stories.
truth story.
yes,
Yeah.
Francis Schaeffer would have disagreed with both Jordan Peterson and Darrow Miller, because 50 years ago Schaeffer saw that this Jungian category of story, why, if it is true story, why can't you call it true truth? So he pleaded that let's use the phrase, if we have to qualify, because the true story means that this is true for you, something else is true for him. But true truth, that this is actually what it is, that God is a triune person, etc., that Jesus died for our sins, rose again from the dead. So why can't we use the phrase true truth? This was very important for Schaeffer. Many other people picked it up. Douglas Gruthaus in Truth Decay, Os Guinness in Time for Truth, etc. But as a culture, the Western epistemology has definitely accepted the Jungian Joseph Campbell's perspective on Peterson does not use the phrase story as a story, but as a worldview, but mostly at an unconscious level. So, in his specialized sense, it's okay. So, what he calls story, we will call a worldview. But the real problem with that is that last night was a historic movement for India where the Prime Minister breathed life into an idol of Lord Rama in an attempt to make India a Hindu nation, deliberately, consciously built upon a myth, a Hindu story of a young prince, Ram, who kills a demon god, Ravan, who had abducted his wife, and rescues his wife only to abandon her while she was pregnant with twin boys. So this was the temple. The new temple has been described as the national temple, like the national cathedral of Hinduism, which a secular state is not supposed to be building, but enormous amount of money was spent in building this movement, the temple, etc. So the Hindus will say that, okay, the Bible is your story, Ramayana is our story, and is the Bible a story? They would acknowledge, for them, the word story means mythology.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So to go back to Ark, when Jordan Peterson, particularly Philippa Stroud, the Baroness, she's very good. She's an evangelical. She was the leader of the 3-day conference. When she describes Christianity as a better story, and she picks some things of Christianity, such as the equal dignity of male and female, which Islam does not believe.
Right.
It isn't
One of these
really a
beautiful flowers that we were speaking about. We were talking about flowers and cut flowers, and yeah, that's an example of one of these beautiful flowers, right?
But is human equal dignity of male and female, husband and wife, is it a better story, or is it a disastrous story that is destroying the family in the West? Or is Islam a better story in the sense that women are not equal to husbands, they have to submit to their husbands? So pragmatically, Islam is succeeding in Europe, where women can have 8, 10 children. The modernist idea that a man should have only one wife and the wife should be able to get rid of the husband as soon as she's fed up with him and has someone better, and she should not have children. So the concept of human dignity without the concept of human depravity, and in a depraved, with depraved heart, rotten heart, how do a man and women live together? A man and a woman, his wife, how do they live together? So by turning Christianity into a story and picking up few themes such as equality and human dignity, actually has made the Western European, I'm thinking mostly of Europe, where Caucasian, in any school in Holland, in a city, population may still be 60% Caucasian, but in the school, 60, 70, 80% of the children would be Muslims and Hindus and Africans, because the white population is not having children, because the family is not working, without the rest of the biblical ideas of how the concept of leadership, concept of headship, etc. But this is where you need not to pick a better story, because a better story without the full biblical worldview becomes a disastrous story, a destructive story, which in fact then hurts the women the most. So feminism picked up a few ideas from the Bible and has hurt women more than Islam has hurt. And
So Vishal, just to summarize what we've been saying here, if I could, just because I'm trying to track with our, I think, really important discussion, we're talking about ARC, the movement. It's got a lot of promise, in the sense that these are public intellectuals with large platforms that are saying, hey, the Bible is really important, and so much of what has been good in the West has come from the Bible. We need to recover that. So that's good, but you're saying there's some real dangers with it as well. One of them is picking and choosing particular things that they like about the Bible, but not seeing it as a comprehensive worldview in a kind of holistic and integrated way. I think another thing that you said was a weakness is that it's still, it's kind of in the realm of ideas. These are biblical ideas that are good ideas, but ideas separated from the people, right? The institution, the people of God, or I might even say, this is where I thought, when I read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's testimony, I thought, I really hope that she can get past the point that she's at right now. It's great where she's at, recognizing that the Bible is good and that Christianity has given so many good fruits to Western civilization, but she needs to get to the point where she sees not just biblical ideas, but the person of Jesus and actually falls in love with him and devotes her life to him, right? There has to be that level of commitment or this isn't going to work. And that's kind of what I was hearing you say when you were talking about the church, the people of God, the people that, have, we're in this, not, we love the ideas, but it's not about the ideas at the end of the day. It's about the person of Jesus, right? Yes. Any thoughts?
Yes. I think you're making a very important point, and I would like to actually go in two different directions. One is this practical issue that you have said about the relationships, human relationships, networks. So how do we take these ideas to the people, the movement, the global movement, to actually change the future? But let's take a few minutes to talk about the individuals themselves, individuals such as Ayaan Hirsi, Jordan Peterson, Tom Holland.
Yeah.
So these people represent what happened to America's greatest philosopher of the 20th century, Mortimer Adler. Adler was born in a liberal Jewish home in New York. At the age of 14, he was distributing newspapers. He started reading Aristotle. From Aristotle, he went on to Thomas Aquinas and began mastering the great classics of Western civilization. So when Chicago University, with the President Hutchins, decided to have the great books curriculum in Chicago, he invited Adler to create the great books curriculum. The idea was that since the Bible has been rejected by Western universities, how is the West going to live? So an alternative Bible, which is the great books of the West, this curriculum was created by Adler. Encyclopedia Britannica published initially these were 54 volumes or 52 volumes, which grew to be 60 or so. So Adler is a liberal Jew, an atheist kind of a person, agnostic at least. But he was married twice. His first wife died. Both his wives were Anglicans, high Anglicans, Episcopal. So he became an Episcopal by the time he was 70, 80. But this was the phase of American Christianity, of mass evangelism by Billy Graham, kind of crusades. Here is a secular intellectual who is struggling and realizing that actually the great books of Western civilization contradict each other much more than so-called contradictions in the Bible, which Thomas Paine had highlighted in the Age of Reason to discredit the Bible. So, and after his second wife died, finally Adler converted to Roman Catholicism because for 50, 60 years, some very intelligent Roman Catholics had become his friends, remained his friends, not trying to impose their religion or Catholicism upon them. But the Protestants had not cared for this public intellectual who was recognized or acknowledged by, in many circles as America's most important philosopher of the 20th century. So he became a Roman Catholic. Now, thankfully, these number of names that I have given, including Elon Musk that you have given, of people who are recognizing that we have to get away from the modernist myth of enlightenment, creating the modern world, back to the roots. These individuals need the community, the church, the friendships, the relationships. And thankfully, there are a number of very good evangelical thinkers. Osgenes is just one who is being widely respected and accepted by these people. But they need a whole group of us to pray for them, befriend them, minister to them, which is necessary for them to eventually enter into a relationship, not just with Jesus personally, but with the body of Christ, which is the church. Now, this is one aspect where on different social media, you would see silly Christians attacking Jordan Peterson because he doesn't follow our details of our theology.
Right.
He says this and he says that. Of course, he's not a Christian yet. But while the evangelical Protestant Christians are condemning these individuals for not accepting our vocabulary and our ideology, but loving them, sticking with them, supporting them without compromising our faith, but sharing openly the reality of Jesus in us, we in Jesus. So the building of this... Sorry, go ahead.
Just on that, I would, again, back to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, when her testimony was published, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, was it?
Several places I saw it, yes.
Okay, anyways. Yeah, I was kind of surprised, in the days following that a lot of evangelicals, responded critically to it, and they recognized that, she doesn't really have a relationship with Jesus. She's talking about ideas and civilizations, but she doesn't really know Jesus. And I thought it was unfortunate, because when I read her testimony, I thought, well, but she's seeing things that you don't see, right? She's seeing the power of these biblical ideas to shape a civilization, which, we in the church, we kind of completely have forgotten. It's just all about getting people into the church and getting them saved. And, we don't talk about culture and civilization. That's not important, right? I mean, and that's been my great frustration. It's like, no, we have to, see our faith as something not just personal and individual and pietistic, but as something that actually shapes cultures for the good, and that's what she's seeing, praise God for that. So it's kind of like, could we being evangelicals, have some humility here? Yes, she needs a personal relationship with Christ. We understand that, right? That's our side. We get that. And she needs that. But we also need something. We need to kind of recover what she's got, which is this bigger picture of what Christianity is, that it's a powerful worldview that shapes a flourishing civilization, right? We need to recover that.
Yeah. 20 years ago,
it's almost like...
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Sorry. Sorry. It's almost like as Christians, we've overcomplicated it in a way.
Yeah.
We get into the theological debates and this and that, and we've in a way forgotten the true story, or as you said, Vishal, the true truth, and then these people from outside the church see the true truth and how absolutely influential it's been in the world.
Yeah.
and they're pointing to that.
Yes.
And as Christians, we lose sight of that,
Yeah.
and we get stuck in our little arguments.
Yeah. 20 years ago, the same thing happened with Jane Fonda when she became a Christian, having been married for the second time with Turner, the CNN, the founder of CNN, and seeing the emptiness of the secular atheistic worldview. And she turned to Christ, but because she had taken a stand against America in Vietnam, the Christian community, the Christian right, would have nothing to do with her, except judgment. And so yes. So the good thing about ARC is that at least 60-70% of the participants identified themselves as Christians. Some were Roman Catholic, some were Orthodox, but vast majority were evangelical. And because there was such a strong Christian presence, the good thing is that Christians have the freedom to speak, although not all the Christians who got an opportunity to speak spoke clearly, including about their personal relationship with Christ. One of the best voices actually was the producer, director of the movie Sound of Freedom. He's running to become the president of Mexico. So he's in the race. And if he wins,
that Mexican, he's really fascinating
if he wins
director,
Mexico, you will suddenly have a president in Argentina and a president in Mexico who are very close to us. And in his case, he was the best Christian witness from the platform in ARC.
So, isn't that something?
Yes.
Yeah.
But he was only one. There were a few others, but many other people who should have been clearer in their testimony were guarded, unfortunately, and that's a problem. So, but the good thing is that these public intellectuals who are realizing they wouldn't call the Bible as the root of Western civilization. They will call Christianity as the root of the West. Now, I prefer to insist on the Bible because Christianity has been so messed up, which the Bible is under attack, was under attack. So, and people have legitimate concerns about promoting the Bible. But I think if the Bible is God's word, then defending the Bible is easier than defending so many mistakes that the church has made. But ultimately, of course, people would insist that, no, we only talk about Jesus. But everything you know about Jesus comes from the Bible. So separating Jesus from the Bible, then you have a Jesus story rather than revelation. But anyway, we have
Vishal.
Yes, Dwight.
I'm pushing back because about 30 minutes ago you said the critical issue was the church. It wasn't just the story.
Yes.
And you were relating to how Bob Moffat
Yes.
said it's the church that holds the story. And so now, and I'm thinking that's I thought of three founders, all of whom believed the story. Thomas Jefferson believed the story, sort of. Benjamin Franklin, who signed the Constitution, believed the story, sort of, and John Adams. But I think of those three, John Adams knew the story and embraced the story, and Jesus lived because he was the only one that sold his slave and said this is wrong. So I think there's a place in Western Civ where Christians really have been salt and light and have made a difference in institutions as believers in Jesus with the Spirit of Jesus in them, and I think that's the deepest root there is.
Yeah. Now, I wish we had half an hour to talk about it because that is a very important point. the problem, they wouldn't have used the phrase story at all. They used the phrase common sense or self evident truth, because America's fundamental mistake or intellectual fall of America began on July 4th, 1776, in the Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be self evident." He didn't write, "We hold this story to be self evident." We hold these truths to be self evident. So originally Jefferson wrote, "We hold these truths to be sacred,"
Sacred. Yeah.
meaning derived from sacred scriptures.
Right.
Benjamin Franklin put pressure to change the language, "We hold these truths to be sacred," to "We hold these truths to be self evident," meaning derived from common sense. Uh, and Jefferson agreed. Now, irony of this was that all of them knew that the idea of human equality had come to North America, 13 colonies, through George Whitefield. Whitefield was the first white preacher in America who began to preach to the blacks. He had slaves, and Jefferson and everybody, Washington, everybody had slaves. It was not self-evident to slaves and slave owners that they are equal. It was not self-evident to most Americans that male and female husbands and wives are equal. But these were not self-evident ideas. These were sacred ideas, revealed ideas. Truth must transform society. We don't observe these truths being practiced in society, but these are the truths, revealed truth, that must change society. But the reason they said that we hold these truths to be self-evident was because of Thomas Paine. The epistemology of common sense, which is really epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, is the heart of the problem. The first great awakening with Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, etc., was built upon teaching the Bible. But because George Whitefield died in 1770, 30 years earlier, Jonathan Edwards had died. So the war began in 75. 76, the Declaration is being written. By then, there is a new kid in the block, Thomas Paine, who is a self-conscious deist who believes that God exists, but God doesn't know how to speak. The Bible is not his words. It's full of contradictions. So he insists, and Benjamin Franklin, who used to be an amplifier of George Whitefield, he loved George Whitefield, he was a fan of George Whitefield, he became influenced by Thomas Paine, who brought this Scottish, Thomas Reid was an apologist, who invented the myth of common sense. And he wrote his book, Common Sense, in America, which was really a biblical defense of revolutionary war, why we must get rid of the tyrant King George, and why America should become free and republican. So on every page of his book, Common Sense, Thomas Paine quotes the Bible left, right, and center. But he calls it common sense, not divine revelation. And under that intellectual pressure, Benjamin Franklin then puts pressure on the drafting committee to, in the Declaration, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. So nobody at that time called anything a story. They called it truth, except that this was truth derived from common sense, not from revelation. But it's only after Joseph Campbell, first Carl Jung, but because Joseph Campbell lived in America and became a lot more influential, that the power of myth, the power of story, has taken over. And this is where Darrow Miller has unconsciously slipped into the language of story rather than in the language of true truth, that these are not speculations of the human mind. These are revealed truths. And the firm foundation of true truth. But of course, that's not your question. Your question is the importance of the church, which is uh, which is which is where I think that DNA, particularly through Bob Moffat, has made a tremendous contribution. It's not yet implemented because DNA is itself a parachurch group, and the church has, being a product of the seminary education, it has deep problems over the last 100 years. But at least in theory, to say that a great awakening of the church is needed, a revival of the church, where church would see itself as if the stem, the branches on which the flowers, the fruit, the leaves grow for the healing of the nations, giving life to the nation, uh, instead of waiting for a UFO called the New Jerusalem to come with the tree of life that will have the leaves for the healing of the nations, that the church exists. The church has actually healed the nations, which is what these people are saying. The people like Elon Musk.
That brings us back to ARC again, Vishal, and I'm glad we're going back there because I do think, I don't know what God's doing, of course, but I do wonder if that's not part of the reason that God has raised up this group right now, is to kind of remind the church of these things, that, we are to be about the flourishing of the nations, the discipleship of the nations with these powerful biblical ideas. And they're seeing it, these folks from ARC, in a way that the church hasn't or has lost sight of. And you've been such a passionate advocate for, in your career, Vishal. So I certainly hope that that's the case. And I really do. I like your message that we need to be building bridges and reaching out, and not just because they need what we have, meaning, this kind of deep, intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, the church, the body, but we also need what they have, and that is what I hope that we can see realized through this this movement that's kind of arisen here. And I am really, the whole discussion you're having about the United States and our founding, I think, is fascinating. We probably should make that a separate episode.
Yes.
That's a really interesting.
If we do, we should talk about nation, because that's part of your name, Disciple Nation DNA Alliance.
Yes.
And nation became important in ARC. So there was one principal of one of the top schools in London. She spoke, and she really emphasized nation and nationalism, which was interesting. And she wasn't coming from the perspective of American Christian nationalism. She was struggling with the issue that you are in London. You have a Hindu prime minister and a Muslim mayor of London, with such a powerful majority of Muslims and Hindus, influential, who are taking over the British economy and leadership. What is going to hold public schools together? Are the values what is going to unite? And she was arguing in ARC that she emphasizes nation and nationalism, that Hindus in London, Muslims in London, Sikhs, Jains, and Christians, they should all come together, not around truth, but around nation. So nationalism, what is going to hold these pluralistic societies together? So the question of nation became very important, although they didn't pursue it very much. But there were voices like her. She was the strongest, and she is a very influential educationist, has won all the top awards for running a successful school in London for a multi-ethnic, pluralistic community. So the significance of your name, Discipling Nations, because since Lausanne, since 1974, The dominant definition of nation was coming from Pasadena missiology, from Fuller and U.S. Center, where nation was a people group. And so if we do another discussion, we should talk about nation, what is discipling nation, and what is the significance of nation. I discuss it in my book. This book changed everything, but I think that would be a good 45.
I would love
discussion.
to have that discussion that we just focus on this topic of nations. And because you're right. I mean, we built, in God's movement, I believe the movement of the DNA around that concept of discipling nations. Nations is so important, and it's become. There's such a revival, if you will, of of interest in that, for good reasons and bad,
Yeah.
Let's, Luke, make a note of that. Let's have Vishal back on if you're willing, Vishal, and we'll
Sure.
talk more about that movement, about the concept of nations. I do think, and we probably need to wrap up, Vishal, but I see ARC as well as kind of a reaction against what just wrapped up last week in Davos, Switzerland, right? The World Economic Forum, right? It's kind of an antidote to that. Did the founders or the movement leaders see themselves as kind of an alternative? Because the group that just met, they're globalists, right? They don't believe in nations.
Yes.
They want one world kind of globalized government, and they're also I think it's just an assumed thing. God doesn't exist. They're secular, right? They're not outspoken, proud atheists, maybe, but it's just an assumed thing, right? There is no God, right?
Yes.
So they would be very much in the stream of the modernist myth, if you will, right?
Yes.
And so, you've got this group now saying, okay, we need other intellectual and, key kind of leaders to get together that have different ideas. Any thoughts on that, just as we
Yes,
are wrapping
you're
up here?
absolutely right. The nation is a very self-conscious, deliberate part of ARC.
Mm-hmm.
And they chose England to launch ARC because Brexit had rebelled against the globalist idea of EU, the European Union.
European Union,
so
right.
overshadowing the nation states.
England as a nation, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, nation and nationalism is a very important theme, which they did not confront head on. But since this is so much behind your name, the disciple all nations, the healing of all the nations, God's call to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that you follow me, I will make you a blessing to all the nations. This is such an important theme. And without the Bible, they cannot have a philosophy of nation.
That's right.
A theology of nation.
Yeah.
And the evangelical movement in America, because of the influence of Fuller and the U.S. Center of World Mission, which no longer exists, has confused global Christianity about what exactly is a nation. And therefore, ARC is trying to recover something which is a Christian idea of nation,
right.
which began in Europe only in 1648. And the Peace of Westphalia was when Holland and Switzerland became the first two nations in Europe.
Just quickly on that, Vishal, because I know we're kind of drifting into our next conversation, but I was always taught that the Treaty of Westphalia and the beginning was the rise of modern nation states, and before that we had empires, and there wasn't nations. But then I read. Who's the Jewish scholar?
Yoram.
Yoram Hazony.
Yoram Hazony. His great book. He said, no, it was because I thought this was fascinating. It wasn't a new idea with the Treaty of Westphalia. It was a recovery of an old Jewish idea, the nation of Israel.
Exactly.
But it got lost because the Bible wasn't opened, and then it was opened after the Reformation, and then it was like people opened the Bible. The Bible was now in the vernacular of these different languages. People were reading the Bible, and they go, "Oh, nation is important."
Yes. That's exactly what happened in Holland. when Holland was fought 80 years of war against the Holy Roman Empire. The last 30 years, everybody was fighting, but before the 30-year war, for 50 years, Holland was fighting against France and Spain. And then in those study of the Bible, the idea of the Jewish idea of nation was accepted. Peace of Westphalia was the climax of Reformation, of the birth of nation state. And but Switzerland, which already existed as a confederacy of 3 cantons, they sent the mayor of Basel to the Peace of Westphalia to argue that Switzerland should be recognized as a sovereign nation, not as a colony of the Holy Roman Empire. So the 2 first nations, and both of them impacted America, the 13 colonies becoming a nation, because America could have become an empire. America could have become 13 kingdoms with 13 colonies. But America becoming one nation was a biblical idea taken from Holland and Switzerland.
Yeah,
So
and going way back to Israel.
Israel.
Let's pick that up as a second discussion.
Sure.
Vishal, I would love to. It's no problem to talk for hours with you. I think we probably just need to wrap this up, Luke,
Sure.
unless
I
you've
have
got
1,000 questions.
yeah.
Sure.
It's so helpful for me, though, and I'm so grateful to kind of get your perspective on this movement and, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, ARC, from your being there. I'm excited by what I'm seeing there and seeing what God's doing. So God bless you for your
sure.
influence in that movement.
And if you wanted a third discussion, we could discuss story and common sense and revelation, the true truth. That would be a very important, because there is a lot of confusion in America whether should we be talking about true truth or should we be talking about story. And we cannot follow Jordan Peterson and ARC in seeing Christianity as a better story. Is it true?
Exactly. Yeah, no, if it's not true, I mean, this is at the heart of our faith. If these things, like Jesus' resurrection, didn't really happen, if they weren't true, then our faith is worthless. It's meaningless.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Luke.
I'm just agreeing. That was one of my favorite parts of the discussion. That's going to be one of my takeaways. How can I not make the same mistake that John Adams did when he was discussing the language behind the Declaration of Independence? There is the language really matters. That when you say story, people think myth. They think Cinderella, Snow White. When you say truth,
fiction.
You think of something. You think of something fixed.
Right.
And that's an important distinction.
Let's have two discussions then, Vishal. We'll talk about nations and then we'll talk about story and truth.
Yeah, I think that would be very good. Both will easily take an hour.
And those are essential to what we're trying to do at the Disciple Nations Alliance. Those are really bedrock. So
sure.
Great, Vishal. Keep up the good work. Let us know how we can be praying for you, and may God continue to use you. I know we didn't even touch on the work that you're doing in India right now. Really important work. You did touch on it briefly, but keep it up, and we're behind you. And
well,
just
India
really
now as of today, India now has a Napoleon.
Yeah, I'm looking at very much on the outside in, barely. So I'd love to talk to you and learn more about what's happening in India right now. But anyways,
I'm sorry that we did not have enough of Dwight, but thank you, Luke, for not just providing the technology, but also interaction.
Hey, my pleasure. Yeah. It was a great time.
Thank you.
We'll have to make sure Dwight and maybe Daryl's on next time too.
Yeah,
Listen,
sure.
Thanks, Vishal, and thank you all as well for listening to another discussion, a really great discussion on ideas have consequences. This is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Vishal Mangalwadi. If you'd like to learn more about Vishal and any of the resources that we mentioned today, just head to the episode page on our website. And on that page, you can find all of the books that we mentioned And you can learn more about our core biblical worldview training course here at the DNA, which, by the way, Vishal played a part in helping us create. And that training, again, is called the Kingdomizer Training Program. So if you'd like to find the episode page, just go ahead and click the link in the show notes below. The Ideas Have Consequences podcast is brought to you by the Disciple Nations Alliance. If you'd like to learn more about our ministry, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or on our website, which is disciplenations.org. And by the way, we just put this podcast on YouTube and YouTube Music, so if you're a YouTube person, you can just head over there and find our show over there now as well. Thanks again for listening, guys, and please share this show with a friend, and we hope you're able to join us here next time on Ideas Have Consequences.